Adversary, written and narrated by Michael Ryan. He stood over the saucepan, a soft gaze on two eggs being gently nudged by bubbling water. Pictures of the past drifted into view, images of her, the old adversary. A track over a ditch was her escape route, the one beside the whitethorn. A threadbare track, worn down by frequent late-night raids, worn down and perfumed by her pungent scent. The track was circumstantial evidence, but irrefutable. She was the culprit, the constant source of indignant frustration, his nemesis. It always happened under cover of darkness. Commando raids on the henhouse. He pictured her escape, clambering up the ditch, a Rhode Island red between her teeth, flapping wings and blood-soaked feathers. Up the ditch, down the field and into the glen, returning to base. Another successful mission. He caught sight of her more than once, but never at the scene of the crime. From his bedroom window in morning light, he would spot her trotting across the front field, prancing and glancing, scanning the territory. Pointed ears, grinning jaw, yellow-orange coat, melting into a thick tail of black. He remembered the first attack vividly. Stirring his porridge at the stove, he had heard buckaw clucking and squawking outside. Familiar sounds, but too amplified to be coming from the hen run behind his house. Stepping into the front yard to investigate, he was met by clucking, pecking and flapping hens, agitated by an uninvited liberation. Some were pecking at what seemed to be drops of blackened blood soaked into the concrete. He inspected the latch of the gate. The simple wooden lever swung limply with a flick of a finger. He had known it needed fixing, but invariably forgot once he had safely deposited the eggs to the kitchen. Last night's rattling wind must have worked the gate open, exposing the innocent to the hazards of a brutal world. A guilt-ridden tally of the troops only yielded 11. One down. A passing predator must have stumbled on his neglect. He replaced the lever with a shooting bolt, while repeatedly promising his girls safe refuge and a bigger ration of feed. Then he turned for home, stopping to close the gate. He pushed the shooting bolt shut, checking and double-checking it was secure. It took a few days before the girls bestowed forgiveness with fresh eggs. A few weeks later, he discovered a fresh pool of blood on the pecked bare ground of the hen run. Another of his girls had been abducted. A close examination of the perimeter uncovered a weakness in the fortification. The predator had found a loose section of chicken wire and squirmed through. He drove metal spikes into the ground and tied them to the fence. But the next raid yielded a double fatality. She had nibbled through the twine that secured the spikes. He dug a trench underneath the perimeter and buried the fence 6 inches deep. That proved to be a poor tactic. The fence was now low enough to invite an acrobatic leap from the nearby concrete post onto the roof of the henhouse. He ran barbed wire around the post to hinder its use as a launching pad. That defence also failed. The attacks were sporadic. Months went by before the next. He spent hours in the workshop, inventing elaborate contraptions to snare the creature, Levers, springs and trigger wires were assembled into machines engineered with all the ingenuity man can muster. Prototypes were strategically positioned, but all failed. He lay poisoned meat as bait. But chemical warfare was abandoned when he saw old Lassie sniffing at the spiked lump of bacon. The war raged for 3 years. 3 years, and he had failed to outfox the fox. Now, he had not wilfully conceded defeat, but he needed to refocus his efforts on a new battlefront that had opened up, a new-found enemy more silent and cunning. The first sign of its presence seemed innocuous. He stumbled in the yard while carrying a bucket of feed. The front of his boot stubbed on a crack in the concrete. He berated his clumsiness, but it happened again a week later. Soon after, he noticed a dull numbness in his feet, followed by a tingling in his fingers. Hands and feet became swollen and were constantly cold. The morning ritual of egg collecting became a Trojan effort. But it was his legs that ultimately failed him. His walk had become a shuffle. The journey to the henhouse over rough terrain became treacherous for legs that refused to rise. A stumble on the humps and hollows inflicted a nasty cut on his forehead that led to a night in A&E. He returned home with 5 stitches and a walking stick. A few weeks later saw the unwelcome delivery of a Zimmer frame. In a gesture of defiance, it was banished into a dark corner. Grudgingly, he did submit to his family's offer to arrange foster homes for his girls. One summer season saw the hen run overwhelmed by weeds. He found himself fighting a new battle to protect his upstairs bedroom. He lost, but only acceded when they cut the lower branches of the ash tree that impeded the view of the front field from the parlour window. Sitting by the fire, he watched his bed being carried like a coffin down the stairs and into the parlour. Inside his shrunken world, he kept a sentry watch on the front field. Early mornings saw him lean against the window, willing her to emerge, anticipating the shameless, prancing, teasing trot across his frontier. His watch yielded sightings that were erratic, but frequent enough to sustain a growing obsession, an irrational need to witness this victory march. Each sighting was a testament to the ravages of time. Her rich orange-red coat became more weathered, with lichen-like patches of mottled grey and white. Autumn and winter had passed since the war had ended, but the ceremonies continued. 2 old warriors, evoking memories of past glories and defeats. A tapping sound snapped him back. The rattling of eggs hopping in a rapidly drying saucepan. Scolding himself, he struggled to cut the gas. He pinched and juggled the eggs into a bowl, taking care not to scald his thinning skin. He would not know if he had. While battling to crack the eggshells, he noticed a faint sound drifting in from outside. He recognized the slow rhythm of a distant bugle accompanying a choir of baying hounds. The hunt was out. He shuffled out the door and cocked his ear. The urgent chorus grew louder before it slowly broke up into single yelps, barks and howls. They were heading this way. He imagined the pack spilling over ditches, across fields. He sensed the wave of wailing excitement rising and falling on the trail of an invisible scent. He dearly wanted to see it, the reckless abandon of a pack in pursuit. Cautiously clutching the walking stick, he hobbled to the front gate and looked down the lane. He thought he could make out something, a blurred shape moving rapidly. He squinted his eyes into focus, but widened them in startled recognition as the figure moved closer, as it bounded towards him in a wobbling gallop. It was her, the old adversary. He silently leaned against the entrance post. She stumbled side to side in confused panic into the entrance, but stopped suddenly when she saw him. Only 10 feet apart. They froze in a startled standoff, their first close encounter. What he saw shocked him. A ripple of ribs, visible through a thin coat of patchy grey and orange hair peppered with crusty mange scabs. Drops of blood oozed from small barbed wire cuts on her legs and a deeper wound on her neck. Only her eyes, vertical black slits in the centre of granite amber yellow, only they validated the myth he had built around her. Time slowed as one old adversary studied the other. A bugle blare jolted them both. She looked behind and then back at him. He nodded a half-hearted consent. She slipped into the yard as a rising cacophony signalled the looming invasion. They were thundering up the lane. He gripped the top bar of the gate and pulled it shut as a frantic pack of bloodthirsty hounds streamed in and charged the barricades. Howling heads strained and shrieked as they tried to squeeze in frustration through the narrow bars. He swung his stick at the protruding heads while cursing them to damnation. But the defences held. A bugle call triggered a synchronized U-turn and a retreat down the lane. Turning around, he saw a trickle of blood on the concrete leading to the old battleground at the back of the house. With a chuckle of disbelief, he shuffled in home and resurrected his breakfast, all the while reliving what just happened, all the while asking, why did he close the gate? He wondered if she was still back there. But the hen run had been out of bounds for the last 6 months. But his curiosity grew, and so did a plan. But it was one that would warrant another surrender. He looked over at the abandoned Zimmer frame in the corner of the room. Eventually, he shuffled over and dragged it out. After a few circuits of the kitchen, confidence outweighed the fear of the rough terrain he would have to cross. He ventured out the door. The voyage was precarious, but he arrived, weakened but unharmed. He saw her, lying outside the perimeter fence of the hen run. Another step towards her triggered her defences. She pulled herself up and dragged her body a safe distance away. He picked his way to the hen run gate and slid open the shooting bolt. Leaving the gate wide open, he turned the Zimmer frame and headed home to safety. Next day, he cut the fat from a chunk of bacon and gathered scraps of bread. Shoving them into a bag, he tied it to the bars of the frame and started out again. He found her, inside the hen run, lying against the outside wall of the hen house. He threw the contents of the bag in her direction. She slowly raised her head and looked at him for a moment before easing down again. He would have spent more time with her, watching her stomach rise and fall, remembering the past, exploring confused emotions. But fatigue had set in. Next morning, he filled another bag with bottled water, a bowl, and whatever he found in the larder. He saw her, lying in the same spot, but she did not look up. He studied her stomach. It did not move. A crow flew down and began to peck and pull at the raw flesh on her neck. In a lightning bolt of indignant rage, he released a roar of fury which shocked him as much as the fleeing scavenger. His swollen hands clenched the frame as he battled to regain control. He lost. He bowed his head and wept, surrendering his broken body to deep convulsions. When he had salvaged some composure, he looked around. He found an empty barley sack within his reach. He picked it up, shuffled into the hen run, and placed it over her, securing it with stones. Then he turned for home, stopping to close the gate. He pushed the shooting bolt shut, checking and double-checking. It was secure.